And so the agenda is a lot of small lessons learned, and I won't read out the whole agenda. I'll just visit that topic area when I get to the slide. So to the first one, that's about the overzealous use of the Agile manifesto. So anybody unfamiliar, the Agile world a long time ago, back in 2001, published a manifesto. It's very short and concise, and it basically says that through this work we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And those statements are fine, and I agree with those. The trouble becomes, or the lesson is, when the left green are taken over the right and the blue. And it goes on to say that while there is value in the items on the right in the blue, we value the items on the left more. But if that's taken to an extreme, then you're adding risk to the project. So for example, if a team were to avoid all documentation because they prefer to have working software, then that's a risk because they have to then communicate things verbally and then remember kind of what they had said. If they deal with suppliers and vendors and customers that are less than stellar and they decide not to have a contract, to put some bounds on those expectations and then just rely on customer collaboration, that is adding risk to the project. So I think the solution here, or the recommendation, is to do both left and right. And the challenge is to make them both work together correctly, and that often takes a bit more effort than many people are willing to expend, or maybe they've been burned in the past by a bad use of documentation or a bad use of project planning or contract negotiation. But that bad example doesn't negate the value of that particular practice. So if I hear a team or see a team kind of rationalize their practices because they rationalize that they really prefer the green items on the left rather than the blue items on the right, I think that they may have missed a little bit of the value of the things on the right and maybe not expended the effort to make those things work correctly. And so you can see my yellow box there. You know, obviously it's a little ridiculous to have all of the left or all of the right. You have to achieve a balance. So the lesson learned is that you do want to have a balance, but it's more effort maybe to make the blue things work correctly, whereas they may not have worked correctly for you before. So the second lesson is about the quality of the backlog. And the yellow boxes and the groups of the yellow boxes are the standard Scrum activities, at least the release planning, sprint review, and retrospective. And if you feed in, obviously, very poor requirements or no requirements, that will occupy the team a lot of time in their sprint to be able to kind of get through that ambiguity and problems to kind of figure out what the backlog actually meant and then achieve or deliver something at the end of the sprint. And so the more quality problems the backlog has, the more time is wasted in the sprint or can be wasted in the sprints trying to recover from that backlog. So the lesson learned here is to make sure there are mechanisms in place to really achieve a level of quality to the backlog so the sprints can really do their work and actually deliver potentially deliver components back to the end user. So let's take that one step further. The backlog is a very good idea, and the idea of user stories is a very good idea because they write the requirements in the terms the user can understand and how they want the system to achieve a particular task that the user actually has. One of the phrases often used in Scrum is that the backlog is a reminder of what to talk about before we start development, and that's where the risk becomes. If you have the backlog just full of reminders of what to talk about, that's feeding in a lot of ambiguity into the sprint. And that means that teams can have to uncover and resolve that, and that could really impact how they can use their time in the sprint to build a component that's actually tested and demonstrated at the end. Now, there are activities in Scrum that are fairly well defined to achieve this. but often they're not done particularly well, or they may be even skipped altogether. And then it's a recovery phase, recovery activity in the sprints to be able to recover from a bad backlog. So there is an expectation. There are test cases kind of written to clarify the backlog requirement. That should be done as a way to uncover ambiguity. If you have to write a test case, then you have to understand the requirement, and that's where that part of test writing becomes requirements analysis. Estimation. Anytime you put a requirement to use, in this case you're estimating the requirement, is a way to uncover ambiguity and problems. And so the intent is to fit the user story or the requirement into a sprint and break it up so it can fit into a sprint. Excuse me. And that means that estimation is a way to get a handle on what the requirement means and boil it down to the activities that are going to take place in that sprint. And then sorting out the relationship between user stories and how they work together and how they're different to look for independency. So you can actually have separate user stories per sprint where possible. Those are three very basic things that should be taking place to tidy up a backlog before entering the sprint. Now that doesn't mean to say every item on the backlog is that crystal clear. As the example below shows, later on in the backlog there are ambiguities and problems kind of flagged as question marks. But as things get fed into or committed to a sprint, they should really be tied up to the point where the team is then able to spend its time to build and learn from that user story and actually demonstrate something at the end. To have much less than that level of quality in the backlog can waste an awful lot of time of the team and cause major problems downstream. Now, as the team goes through some analysis of the user story, they can obviously modify their backlog to have other columns to capture some of these details. So my details column there is just a very simple example to capture what may be below the details or definition of the user story. If the user stories are somewhat complicated, even referring back to a use case is a good example of how to maybe complete the details column. So maybe some user stories have lots of flow issues or user scenarios that have to be kind of taken care of. And just to kind of hash those out, use case definition gives a very good structure or a template of questions to ask to clarify what's behind the user story and what kind of issues do we have to take care of. So there could be some user stories on the backlog that are fairly straightforward and only worthy of a extra couple of lines of definition. And there could be some that are more high risk or more complicated. They can still fit into the sprint, but you don't want to just kind of guess how the user story works. And a use case it provides a standard set of questions to record to navigate the issues under that user story. And then there could be columns, of course, for test case capturing, and then ways they're going to estimate. So the backlog should be groomed pretty thoroughly before entering a sprint, otherwise it could waste a lot of time. And there's an interesting paper there, if you haven't seen it before, by Jeff Sutherland, who is one of the founders of Scrum and Agile. And that is that he did some work with a lead appraiser doing a level 5 appraisal, and really kind of saw how a level 3, 4, and 5 company that's doing good requirements development is really taking the Scrum issues or Scrum practices and digging much deeper into kind of how they're performed to tidy up the backlog before entering into a sprint. So there's some good lessons learned even by Jeff about how teams have taken the backlog idea and really kind of cleaned up their work before embarking on their development. The next lesson is about release planning, and there's a couple of issues here. One is fairly straightforward, and that is I've seen teams actually eliminate